Thank you all three for joining us. We appreciate it. I think, Mr. Mogoena, if we can start with you, have you been able to go through this report? We do understand that the report has found that there is some kind of overcrowding in schools here in Gauteng, but there are a number of factors at play here. But let's get your first response to how Equal Education has found overcrowding.
Good afternoon, Heidi, and good afternoon to you viewers at home and my colleagues who are there. So yes, we have read the report indeed, and we welcome the report by Equal Education, especially as it relates to the issues that are causing overcrowding in our schools in Gauteng, but also in terms of the proposals that they are making. Basically, these are the proposals that we've always been making as a union in terms of, relational allocation of resources. So critically, I think we can be able to engage with the report, and then the GDE and the Department of Basic Education can really go further in terms of really accepting this report and making sure that the recommendations are being implemented. So we welcome it.
Sure. I just want to add so that our viewers know that we did try to reach out to the Department of Education here in the province, but we understand that they still want to study the report as it's quite lengthy. It's about 72 pages. Devan, let's speak to you about your initial response to this report. We know that it's not just overcrowding in terms of how many pupils are in the classroom, but there's also an issue around how 82% of classrooms lack furniture and how this can contribute to an unconducive environment for pupils as well as teachers.
And when we lack basic resources in the system, like furniture and other resources that make it comfortable for the learning experience, you find that learners tend to be a lot more disconnected, disjointed. It puts undue pressure and stress from a teaching capacity or the skill set of the teacher. Because now what needs to happen is you've got to make do with the infrastructure that's available at that particular time. And the pressures are that much that we find that the results of the learners thus tend to resonate as far as what the infrastructure looks like. So I feel exactly the same way, is that lifting the lid and having the conversation around aspects like furniture, other resources, even staffing resources within the system, are absolute fundamentals in terms of success of those learners. And we even see it as they exit and go into the further education space and as they come into the TVET space. Or if they go into employment and they go into learnerships, then basic things like maths literacy and other forms of literacy and other subjects become a challenge because they haven't been addressed in the basic form or in the basic sector. Due to things like overcrowding, desks and chairs and other resources, as you mentioned.
Sure, it would actually be quite interesting to see how other provinces fare in terms of overcrowding, lack of infrastructure. Aubrey, let's quickly get your response to the fact that this report only did research with specific schools and not a large number. We know it's 9 schools, 751 in total. That's 74% of the 557 of these learners. But maybe speak to us about how all 9 schools that were studied, we understand that classrooms are too small for the number of learners they hold.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it has been, and greetings to my colleagues, it has been happening for quite a long time. And we've been raising it as a union to say the issue of overcrowding is an issue. We actually welcome the research. It will help ourselves and the Department of Education, GDE and DBE to plan. And also to make sure that what we raised some years ago is really the truth. But it's not all about infrastructure and the number of learners in the class. It's actually affecting the curriculum. Teachers are also affected as far as the assessment is concerned, because the bigger the number, the more challenges are in the classroom. So this report will actually help us to plan further and also makes our recommendation more easier. It's true, the size of a class is a challenge. Remember, this issue has been raised prior to COVID-19 to say the ratio of 1:20 makes sense to us. We cannot go back to 1:40 where teachers are unable to impart knowledge to these learners, and learners are able to grasp the knowledge. Thank you very much.
Sure. Let's move over to Mr. Maluleke. We do know that the report also highlights that all schools where research was conducted have teachers that are overworked. Now, this is a huge problem because if you have teachers that are overworked, this is going to directly impact the kind of quality of teaching in these classrooms.
Eddie, I just want to make sure that indeed we agree with that. We have indicated that killer number one in education is the overworking of the teachers. They're overloaded, but also not overloaded just in terms of the number of learners that they have got to teach, but obviously they also do administrative work. So basically they are sinking into a situation where they are very depressed, and we see from the Human Science Research Council as research has always been highlighting this particular issue of overloading, that it is leading to many teachers being absent from work because they're not well, but also it has led to a number of teachers being admitted in hospital for depression. And remember, Heidi, the policy in the country is that if you are admitted for a depression, the school does not have a teacher. So it is not going to be substituted. And that is an area that we are really dealing with it in terms of understanding why would the learner not have a teacher in front of them when a teacher is admitted due to depression, because it is caused by the burnout that is there at the level of the school. It's caused by the trauma that they teachers themselves put themselves in a situation where they don't want any single learner not receiving education. So normally what teachers do, they attach themselves to the learners because they are teachers, they are parents, and they are building relationships. So normally it affected them emotionally and psychologically because no teacher wants to see a learner failing at the end of the year. So killer number one is overloading of teachers. Administrative work, we've said it in 1998. From there, we said, you bringing outcome-based education in a country that has got no resources. One, it means you are going to overload the teachers because the outcome-based education is resource-dependent, it's resource-intensive. So if it's resource-intensive, it means you need to provide the teacher with a laptop. You need to make sure that the teacher is supported by an administrative support personnel. You need to make sure that the principal has got enough education support personnel at the level of the school, but you also have got making sure that learning support material are enough for each and every learner, so that you then have to have the education support people and the assistant teachers who are able to help the learner to be able to complete their work, given the fact that most of the schools are suffering from social capital because the parents are working far from where their homes are, and some arrive at home 8 o'clock in the evening. They have got to travel long distances, and that as a result would not be able to help their children as the parents, and therefore they need this particular education assistance who will then be able to help them. At one point, Gauteng practiced that, and it was really helping. At a particular point in time, Gauteng addressed the issues of literacy and numeracy, and it was helping. Now, the problem is when you change the MECs in an education system, each one of them brings their own policies as if there are no policies at national level that are standard, that are providing even guidance to then say how many learners are supposed to be there. So, yes, I fully agree with you. This is killer number one. Every survey we do as an organization, including Naptosa, would agree killer number one is administration that the teachers are doing, but also the marking of manuscripts in terms of different languages. I mean, the school where I used to work, we had got about 4 languages. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of factors at play here, and this is why this report by Equal Education says one needs to understand the context of overcrowding, and it's not just having a large number of pupils in a classroom, but there are a number of other factors that affect this. Devan, let's quickly get your perspective on how you think overcrowding in Gauteng schools trickles down and impacts communities and families, because, you know, normally when you send your child to school, you think it's a conducive and positive environment, but then you have situations of poor infrastructure, lack of infrastructure, teachers that mentally are not okay because of the overcrowding, or you have classrooms that just have too many pupils in. How do you think this affects communities and trickles down into families and communities?
This has a very serious long-term effect, because what it boils down to is lack of attention in the classroom. So a lack of attention will be lack of understanding. And lack of understanding translates into the learner simply not being able to cope and make the necessary grades. And when we look at our household, in many cases in these communities, these parents simply cannot afford the time in the day because they're so busy putting food on the table, as opposed to having to worry about how the learner is coping within a classroom environment. So in many cases, a lot of these parents, and I'm not discouraging proactive parenting at all when I say this, but in many cases, the parent will depend on the schooling system to provide support for the learner, so that the learner fully understands the curriculum and is making the grade and is immersed into the subject. So when that doesn't happen, we see the learner start to lag behind. Then family units start to struggle somewhat, because then there's got to be more attention and focus in terms of guiding and supporting the learners, because they're not getting it now in the classroom, because the numbers are just simply too high and the teacher ratio is just exorbitant. And sometimes parents themselves don't understand the curriculum necessarily to be able to support in that way, whereas the teacher is the most or the best qualified to do so. And when we have disengagement in this way, we find it has a ripple effect into societies and communities, because children who are not actively engaging in academic work outside of school, or focused on that level, or focused in the sporting arena or other hobbies like that, will engage in other areas that are not productive and may necessarily be a debilitator in terms of positive growth and upliftment from an academic perspective. So loitering, and for them not being focused and having attention, that has a serious effect on the community at large. So we're missing the mark with giving solid attention and focus within the education, the basic education sector, which is in the classroom. Then unfortunately, this resonates into the community at large, as well as into family structures. And then we see it in the TVET and FET spaces. And then we see that learners don't necessarily make the grade to get into HET divisions or practice, or get accepted into other learning institutes as a result of low grades.
Sure. Aubrey, let's get your perspective on what you think the Gauteng Department of Education should do. Of course, Equal Education in its report says that GDE must publish a comprehensive and forward-looking plan to address this. But why do you think it hasn't been addressed to a point that's satisfactory for all involved?
Thank you. I think what the GDE should do is that to go through the report, investigate further, to check whether what was in the report is truly reflecting what is on the ground. The other issue is that to actually look at the post-provisioning structure to say, is it relevant to the current situation that we find ourselves in as South Africans? Does it actually addresses the needs of the community? Does it address the needs of the teachers in the classroom? Does it address the needs of the learners in the classroom? Because truly speaking, a remedial is a challenge in a bigger classroom where 1 is to 40 learners are there. Sometimes a teacher takes almost a year to find a learner who's actually struggling, and that causes a lot of drop learners in the school environment. Why? Because we cannot give them support. Particularly psychosocial support is also compromised when the class is big. So I think what needs GDE to be done is to investigate further, look at their post-provisioning structure, and also address the issue of teacher ratio. I think that is critical. Remember, Gauteng is a province where quite a number of other provinces that are flocking into Gauteng. It's important that we actually take into consideration those factors. Thank you very much.
Sure. Let's just get your perspective, Mr. Maluleke, on the fact that now there's a new variant, the Omicron variant. This is possibly going to affect the schedule of schooling should we move into lockdown, even though schools are probably going to go on holiday as of the 15th of December or so. But how do you think this is going to further, if at all possibly, exacerbate the situation in schools with overcrowding, lack of infrastructure, and also the allocation of funds? Because we do know that budgets have been cut to accommodate measures needed to be put in place for the pandemic.
Thank you, Heidi. Indeed, the impact is going to be very huge if this particular variant is not going to be well managed. Clearly, it's going to exacerbate the situation that we are finding ourselves in, because already we have lost a lot of time. Indeed, our learners and the teachers are really collectively traumatized, and then we're going to be seeing a lot of mental health issues. That's number one that we need to be addressing. So as we may not be able to see the impact now, as we are closer to the school holidays and we are almost done with the matric examination, we had begun to see a number of teachers testing positive. We've already begun to see learners testing positive, and that in itself is going to have an impact come next year in terms of the space, in terms of how we are going to be able to provide for that. So whilst there might have been hope that because the 12 years after the 17 years are going through vaccination, and therefore they may then have to come to school, all of them, instead of a rotational timetabling, I believe that it is not going to be a possible, given the fact that from the scientific perspective is that this particular variant is more transmissible, is more faster, and therefore it has a way of also undermining the vaccination. But there are still a lot of research that is going to go into that. We want to encourage as many people to continue to be vaccinating, especially the 12 years up to the 17 years and 18 years. They must really provide, they must avail themselves of vaccination. So we need more resources. The austerity budget is not going to help us at all. We have said that we need to campaign for finance education. We have said to the president of the country, we need education relief fund that will be focusing specifically on those particular schools that are not able to accommodate all the learners at the same time, because this rotational education is not working for our learners. We're going to see a lot of a deficit that is going on, especially as we were listening to Devan, that this is going to have a ripple effect. So it means the learners of 2020 who came into the system are going to have this particular long-term deficit in terms of skills they require.
Sure. Devan, as we close off, I would just like to ask you whether or not you think these reports yield any positive results. We see reports after reports, yet the problems remain, especially in basic education, not just in Gauteng, but across the country. And what's interesting about this equal education report, it highlights the fact that GDE in Gauteng says there is only a small teacher shortage, and that there, in fact, isn't much overcrowding in classrooms. Do you think that this report will yield any results, and that GDE will, in fact, react appropriately and deal with the issues?
You know, Heidi, what reports like this tend to do, and every time they have been released, and in the past, this is not the first report, and this is not the first time we're having the dialogue, but what it does do is it lifts the lid, and it opens the conversation, and we start again having robust discussions around what needs to take place. I believe that this needs to become high on the agenda, because it's such a crucial area that warrants a lot of energy and a lot of dialogue and a lot of discussion. So if the report has achieved that for now, even engaging in this conversation and having ears to the ground, or stimulating or inspiring a level of change in this sector, I think then it's slowly but surely aiming to achieve its desired results by way of positioning different options that are available and what can be done. So I'm hoping that we see a lot more dialogue and a lot more conversation taking place in terms of what needs to happen within this very crucial sector. And remember, if our students are simply not supported, and if we're not talking about it, then it means that nothing's going to change. It simply means that we're simply going to go back and we're not going to be able to fix things. So I like that we're having the dialogue, and I would like to see the conversation be stimulated even further, because I can tell you that as these learners move from the general education segment into the further or the TVET space and the higher education space, we have to prepare them effectively for the next levels. And we need to do that by finding some sort of solution.
Great. And Aubrey, just maybe you can end off for us. How urgent do you think is it for GDE to consider this report and take action?
Thank you very much. I think it's very urgent for GDE to take this report very serious. Particularly, the schools are now planning for 2022 academic year. So it's very critical to say they actually look into the report and then investigate further and come up with resolutions to say how are they going to address the challenges. It's not going to be an overnight thing, but it needs to be addressed as soon as possible to allow principals and SMT in different schools to plan. Remember, the GDE is still using the 2019 post-establishment, which is very clear to say they are not allocating posts to the schools. So that needs to change. We are aware that they have allocated growth posts to quite a number of schools. We appreciate that. But we need to do more. They need to actually look into the post-provisioning and check whether that is not going to affect the teaching and learning comes 2020.
Great. Thank you all so much for your insights. Hopefully we'll be able to get reaction from the Department of Basic Education here in the province. That was Devan Moonsamy, who's an education expert, Mogoena Maluleke, who's the General Secretary of SATU, and Aubrey, who is from Naptosa.